Welcome to Loose Parts Nature Play, building creativity one leaf and bolt at a time. This week's episode focuses on loose parts in nature play, featuring ideas from Nurture in Nature. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Loose Parts Nature Play. My name is Dr. Carla Gull. You may recognize me from my Facebook page and group, Loose Parts Play, or my nature blog, Inside Outside Michiana, sharing experiences with loose parts and our local natural adventures. I currently teach beginning college classes online with the University of Phoenix, as well as provide early childhood programming, professional development in regards to loose parts, outdoor classrooms, nature play, STEM, and education. So not too long ago, I was interviewed by Tanya Maloney from Nurture in Nature. She has a great program and does all kinds of cool stuff that she has like her own nature bus that she can drive around places. She leads conferences in Australia and provides professional development in a treehouse club and such of that sort. I am looking forward to seeing some more of our interview come out, but I thought she just had some great questions that gave me some good places to ponder about. She talked about just kind of asking, first of all, just kind of what is loose parts and where did it come about from? And if we look at Simon Nicholson, he is the architect that kind of coined this phrase back in 1971. I encourage everyone to read the theory. I say that all the time, read the theory. And I do have some podcast episodes that kind of talk about the theory in more depth, but I think that it's important for each of us as educators to read it as well. There is so much in it beyond just the stuff of loose parts. It talks about engagement. That's always an issue. Problem solving, creativity. And I've also done another podcast episode called Rethinking Nicholson's Intent, which I think is really important to kind of understand some of the concepts that he talks about as part of that. I've been doing a fair amount of professional development with groups in Canada, all over the United States, and different places along that concept as well. As an academic researcher, my colleagues and I have worked to create a definition of loose parts in particular for outdoor classrooms in early childhood settings. However, we found that the definition really could be applicable all over the place, and that's an important concept to consider. Another podcast episode, obviously, on that. So just kind of looking at that, one thing that Simon Nicholson said, in any environment, both the degree of inventiveness and creativity and the possibility of discovery are directly proportional to the number and kind of variables in it. And you've probably heard me say this lots and lots of times. All children love to interact with variables such as materials and shapes, smells, and other physical phenomena such as electricity, magnetism, and gravity, media such as gases and fluids, sounds, music and motion, chemical interactions, cooking and fire, and other people and animals, plants, words, concepts, and ideas. And I would say that's not even the end of it. With all of these things, all children love to play, experiment, discover, invent, and have fun. All of these things have one thing in common, which is variables or loose parts. And that's by Simon Nicholson again. I love that he really thinks about how we can experiment and learn and grow from the environment around us and interacting with them in different ways. I would say that his intent kind of goes beyond this to some degree. He looks at limiting the restrictions. How can we have a yes mentality in play and learning, involve children in that planning and using planning and building of our spaces, blur those lines between inside and outside. We don't have to have distinct inside and outside zones, but both can be part of both spaces. Create a lab-like environment where it's okay to experiment and explore with that, ask questions and investigate to figure it out, solve real-life environmental problems. And I love this. It's not just, to me, this gives it like applicability. And if we want children to be able to solve problems of the future through, the use of loose parts, they're experimenting and solving problems now to figure out how they might do things. Allow, once again, children to be part of their learning process through the experimentation. It's a hands-on thing. It is not something that they're just reading about or watching on a video, but they are doing and moving and tinkering and exploring and experimenting. Use a variety of approaches to loose parts play. Do have podcast episode and blog posts around 30 plus approaches to loose parts. Just add water. Water always makes it better. Use what we have naturally and make sure that we have time for play. but it's not the only verb that he used. There's lots of different actions that may be part of our spaces. And I like people to think about, hey, what actions are happening in your space? Some of the ones that are in his article: build, construct, play, experiment, invent, explore, discover, evaluate, modify, study, think, consider, measure, draw, make, calculate, destruct, slide, fold, hide, paint, bounce. Those were all just in that original theory by Simon Nicholson. And so to me, that gives, while play is going to be at the center and important, as part of that play, all kinds of other things, including learning, are happening. And for some of us who may be teaching elementary school or something of that sort, there are principles from this theory that can be applied to those learning aspects of education. Another thing she asked about was just the role of the educators or parents in a loose parts play. For me, it's really developing that yes mindset. How can we allow some of that experimentation? Children have been told no time after time after time, to where they kind of stop exploring and experimenting with things. And so it doesn't mean that we can't have parameters around what we're doing, but just how can we develop that loose parts mentality kind of as much as possible with that? And with that, Kira and Veselak, they mention different essentials for loose parts. They talk about space being flexible, predictable, and adequate space. So can we provide some space for the children in our care? Time, large blocks of uninterrupted time, as big of a block as we can. It's not just 15 minutes, go do your loose parts play, but just giving them time to really kind of dig into that. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do 15 minutes of loose parts play if that's really all we have. But I really encourage people to advocate and try to find the time to give larger blocks of it as they can. Materials should have an abundance of natural and open-ended materials that can be used in lots of different ways. And we're the ones that are kind of on the side supplying those to make sure that we've got them. Enriched environments allow children to find what they need to make things happen. And the educators would be caring, observant, and participating as needed. That means we may just be on the side or working on our own thing and keeping an eye out on the children. So, yeah, but that caring and observant nature that we have can be very helpful with that. And also just kind of remember the schema. There are certain predictable behavior patterns that children kind of go through, and just being aware of it. And instead of getting frustrated, like with certain behaviors, dumping and pouring, just realize that as part of these repeated patterns of behavior that children go through. It's just developmentally what happens right now. And I suggest kind of trying to capitalize on that. If you see certain schema, what kinds of loose parts can you add to help with that? And Michelle Thornhill, she has a great document about, it's called Loose Parts and Intelligent Playthings Categorized by Schema. And then she has loose parts, natural loose parts, large play, recyclables, additional tools or bases for something like that. And then like commercial toys and gifts, and really helps kind of think of some ideas that might go with that kind of thing. But some of these schema may be transporting, picking things up, moving them, putting them down, or dumping. Lots of transporting in those earlier years. Transforming, so using materials to explore changes in shape, color, consistency, etc. Trajectory, exploring horizontal, vertical, diagonal movements of things and self. So going down the slide, using ramps, throwing things up. Yeah, catapult kind of stuff. Rotating and circulating, experimenting to make things turn, exploring lines and circles. Think of stirring the mud pot, soup pot out in the mud kitchen. Enclosing and enveloping, surrounding objects or selves with things. So hiding, covering, or wrapping self or into objects with that as well. Connecting, joining things together, tying things together. There are different ways you can connect. Even like I remember, even like paper clips, taking those and connecting them and connecting them and connecting them. Disconnecting, taking things apart. Positioning, ordering, arranging, classifying, seriating those, putting things beside each other, lining them up and stacking them. So I think it's important just to remember that these are repeated patterns of behavior that we see all over the world with children, and children aren't trying to drive us crazy. They are just doing what is developmentally appropriate for them, and then try to match up potential options with the schema that we see them exploring. And she also asked, have you seen perception and practice in the area of loose parts play change and evolve over time? I would say that while this is an age-old principle from the first time someone picked up a rock and a stick and thought they could use it for something besides a rock and a stick, loose parts, that concept has been around. It was just given a name, I guess, in 1971. Before that, adventure playgrounds in the rubble after World War II, with children using the bricks and such that they found in the aftermath of the war to create their places to play. That was another part of that. If you look even further back, like Froebel and the gifts that he has, the blocks and the balls and some of those different ways of doing things, those would be part of the things moving up in this movement of loose parts. Right now, I'd say it's exploding right now. There have been several books on the topic, and we have our own book, Loose Parts Learning in K-3 Classrooms, my research colleagues and I. That's coming out in November with Griffin House Publishing. And so I think you might be interested in that. But a lot of what we see are these like cute, Pinteresty worthy kind of setups. But to me, while that's not bad, but loose parts can be so much more than that. And how we allow children to use those cute setups is important as well. So if we're only allowing them to do what we think they should be doing with it, we're really missing out on the magic, I think, of it. It is really more about the messy side of play and interacting with the materials as opposed to having that predetermined outcome kind of thing. It's kind of, I hope that we're moving more from the how to what do the children need, kind of asking about that. So just something to think about and consider within that aspect. So she also asked about if I were working with a group of kids or educators or parents, any of those kinds of things around loose parts, and notice that they're not naturally engaging with them. Sometimes this concept, like we get really excited, oh, we're going to do loose parts, though I would argue that most of us are doing loose parts to some degree. We just have to kind of recognize that that's what it is, like the block play and such. And I have a large loose parts umbrella where many things can fit underneath that, like tinkering and maker labs and some of those things. Outdoor natural playgrounds often have loose parts on them as well. Pop-up play, adventure playgrounds, those would all be kind of under that umbrella of loose parts. And so I do have a whole podcast episode around this. I think it's called The Kids Aren't Playing. But these were just some of my tips around hesitant children. And especially as you move as they get older, it seems like they're losing some of that ability to think beyond the box if it's not been encouraged and cultivated, perhaps, and kind of almost shut down and sometimes. So these are some tips for those hesitant children. Sometimes we just need to give it time, let them have time to ease into it and such. Going back to that schema, remember the ages and stages of children. We are not going to expect 2-year-olds to build elaborate, huge castles. So think of developmentally appropriate aspects that children may be interacting with materials. And I encourage us not to get disappointed if they're just exploring the schema that is developmentally appropriate for them at that time. Keep introducing variety of materials and things and options. Like with one class with Tinkergarten I was leading recently, we're making like homes and nests for animals, and that led into building forts with the children's own play with that. So just allowing different ways of interacting, and I have a podcast on the 30 plus loose parts that may be helpful, and blog posts. My number 4 here is to give permission. I find that sometimes children feel like they've been told no so many times, or they're not quite sure what the parameters are. And so by opening up the parameters, it's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know if I can do that. So give them permission and invite them into that space to think about the possibilities of what they may do. And sometimes I'll even kind of I'll tell you in a minute because it's one of my other ones. Just a minute. Another tip may be to have consistent places for the loose parts. If they can find them over and over again in the same place, that can be very helpful. Model play yourself. We can be curious and inquisitive. I know I was leading a program a week or so ago, and I had those bigger plastic spools, like you might have rope or something on. And as children were and parents, it was a family activity, were there and checking things out. I saw some things maybe being a little underutilized, like these spools, because we love these. But it was the first time they had ever been exposed to something quite on this level, with all the loose parts everywhere. And my son was like, "This is a little much even for you, Mom," because I had all this stuff going into the van to take and such. But anyways, I just started experimenting. There was a boardwalk there and rolling it as fast as I could on that. And so just some of my own play and being inquisitive myself allows children to maybe explore some of those things as well. And sometimes I even, like with that, they were there as I was setting up, and I just, "Hey, do you want to go experiment and see what you might do with this basket and rope?" And so I would just give them an invitation to go do something, and they would get things started and go back and was like, "There's no right way or wrong way. Just try it out. See what you might do with this." So 7, consider the play schema. Like I'd mentioned before, we've really got to remember those ages and stages. 8, just add water. Water is magical if we're in a place where we can use water, and it's fine to have limited amounts of water. Even just a shallow plastic Tupperware kind of tub can be very powerful to be able to explore with water. Number 9, magnetism is magical. I don't know anyone who doesn't like exploring with magnetism, and so offering different options like that can be very helpful. Number 10, strew items about, and strewing is where you kind of have things left out and partially started that they can take anywhere they want to. Take a tour and brainstorm. And this is something, especially with groups that have never done anything like this, we just kind of walk around the different things that I have brought with me and, "Oh, I wonder what you might do with this." And they come up with lots of ideas, and they may use some of those, or that's just enough to get them started. And then they can explore and experiment with other ways of doing it as well. And just kind of brainstorming and just listing some of those things out that as a group they may do. Not me giving all those ideas, but yeah. And number 12, take it outside. I find, I love loose parts anywhere, but I find that outdoors gives them just a lot more space and such to really kind of work on some of these things. I might use a loose parts inspired book, and I do have lists of these in Amazon store, Loose Parts Nature Play, lists of them there, but then also on the website and such as well. Just seeing how someone else is being creative can lead to exploring your own creativity as well. "Oh, I wonder how I might use these materials." And maybe similar, maybe different. It's usually very different, but those are some things to do with that. I really like Roxaboxen and Matland for that outdoor play, just using kind of the scraps and junk that we find outside with things. Number 14, display pictures of work that they have done or children have done before. So that's usually how I document that loose parts interaction, is through pictures, and printing some of those out and putting them up, or creating a book or something lets them see, "Oh, other people have explored with this. I wonder how I might do it too." 15 is sportscast the action. Just kind of being there, describing what you're seeing happening can be powerful with that. Okay, study the child's interests. If they are interested in insects and bugs, and I know many children that are, perhaps bring some interesting things along that they may use loose parts for that. Jack Velhudsen, I cannot say that right, sorry, but he posted many of the connected groups like Loose Parts Play, and just shared how he had all these metal bits and pieces and was making all kinds of insects with them, which was super cool looking. And 17, allow for messier spaces. It's going to get a little messy. And if we tidy up everything right away, we're going to stifle some of that loose parts exploration, I think. That doesn't mean it has to be a disaster zone, but just loosen it up a little bit. Number 18, add more quantities. Sometimes if you just have a couple of random things, having 10 of something may be more powerful than having just 1 or 2 of a couple different things. So just consider how many of things you have. 19, use provocations. So sometimes just thinking about things that may pair well together as a start. Sometimes I call those loose parts starts. Those can be ways of doing things. 20, add to the children's play. So while they're playing, watch what they're using and anticipate some of the things that may be helpful for them and just put it nearby. That can be very powerful. process over product. Remember, the end result is not as important as the thinking and problem solving, collaboration, and creativity that's happening during the play. And 22, celebrate the play. I think that that's really important to consider that as well as part of the children being more hesitant to play and such. So I hope that this gives you some food for thought, some things to think about as part of this. And so there are several other questions that she brought up, some objections and concerns, but those may be some of the ones for a future episode. And you may recognize some of the things we've talked about, but these are just kind of some of the basic principles around loose parts. I've been having a lot of people ask, well, how do I get started? And just getting started. And that actually would be a good episode to talk about some options with that and just making some plans for moving forward with it instead of, oh yeah, we're going to do that next year. And it's so easy just to do a little bit here and there, And one educator recently at a program I was hosting, she said, well, we've got all this stuff. I never thought of bringing it out like this and letting them do whatever they want to with it. I'm like, yes. And that's exactly kind of what Loose Parts is. We have those things typically around us and we can use them in lots of different ways. I hope this gave you some food for thought, and I encourage you to check out some of the other related podcast episodes around this and Loose Parts Play group and other publications and things around this. We're signing off today as Loose Parts Nature Play, building creativity one leaf and bolt at a time. Find us at loosepartsnatureplay.com. Thank you.